They have had to rely in the past very, very heavily on Russian warplanes. And of course, Russian warplanes have been occupied very aggressively for the last nearly 3 years, and indeed earlier in Ukraine. So this is a moment in which the rebels, led by Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is an Islamist organization, have been able to consolidate and then assault against what now appears to be a very, very weak central government in Damascus.
Now we're going to Syria, where the Syrian army says it is withdrawing from the city of Hama. This is hugely significant. It marks the second major gain for rebel forces, who also captured Aleppo last week, and nobody thought that they would be able to capture Hama. So for the latest on this, I'm now joined by the veteran international correspondent Sam Kiley. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Thank you.
You've been closely watching this Syrian civil war for the last 14 or 15 years, and you've been to Syria. Tell us what's happened. Hama is a big surprise, isn't it?
Well, it is a big surprise. And whilst people like myself and others have been keeping an eye on Syria for a long time, I have to confess that alongside Russia and Iran, allies of the Damascus regime, we all took our eye off the ball, given the focus of events on Ukraine and Gaza, Lebanon and Israel. As a consequence of that, or taking advantage of that, Syria's rebels have swept through south from their stronghold in Idlib, as you say, through Aleppo. Now they've taken Hama almost unopposed. Hama is a very important kind of multiple crossroads. It has routes to the coast, it has routes to the interior of Syria, and of course, above all, it has routes down south through Homs and on to Damascus. Now, there'd be a lot bigger fight over these cities as the rebels approach Damascus, but they have had to rely in the past very, very heavily on Russian warplanes. And of course, Russian warplanes have been occupied very aggressively for the last nearly 3 years, and indeed earlier in Ukraine. So this is a moment in which the rebels, led by Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is an Islamist organization, have been able to consolidate and then assault against what now appears to be a very, very weak central government in Damascus.
Well, look, this is a huge kind of geopolitical issue, and it's a kind of playground for the great powers. It's very kind of like the 19th century, isn't it? Because these rebels could not be doing this without Turkey's implicit or indeed explicit backing. So what is going on there?
Well, it's a very complex web. So you're right. The Turks have groups that they back in the north of the country. They back them as a kind of defensive line against any kind of opportunity taken by the Assad regime to advance. They also back some rebel groups because it's easier to rent them than fight them. And then, of course, they also back groups that are opposed to that very significant Kurdish enclave in the northeast of the country, known and because of that, the Turks are absolutely integral to this. They're very tight-lipped about what they want out of this rebel advance. You're right, it couldn't have been done without the knowledge, if not the approval, of the Turks. But the deeper they go into Syria, the more this rebel group becomes a kind of independent entity, albeit reliant on lines of supply, principally going to be coming from Turkey. Of course, sorry to interrupt, the Damascus regime is also getting support from Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed branch of Hezbollah in Iran. Sorry to interrupt there.
No, I was interrupting you, because what I wanted to ask was, what are the Russian government saying to the Turkish government then? Because the Russians obviously are backing Assad. So in effect, this is a challenge from Turkey direct at Russia.
I don't think the Turks are not directly involved in this. They don't like the Syrian regime. They want stability above all in Syria because, of course, they've had to absorb more than 1 million refugees into their own country. Turkey's also, whilst not an ally of Russia, is the only NATO partner that talks to Russia in any significant way and does have a relationship because of its control of the Bosphorus Sea and access to the Black Sea, Bosphorus Straits and the access to the Black Sea. So in that context, Turkey, as ever, straddling east and west in a very kind of delicate position. But I think it'd be unfair to suggest that the Turks are kind of driving this rebellion against the Assad regime in a very explicit way at this stage.
And you alluded to Russian jets being occupied in Ukraine. I mean, the other significant part of this advance is it throw into kind of stark relief how weakened Russia is, obviously how weakened Iran is. They can no longer, as it were, play on more than one stage.
Well, the Russians are employing their aircraft against the rebels in country. There's a recent, I haven't had a chance to verify it myself, but allegations that once again Russian aircraft have been involved in bombing hospitals as far north as Idlib. If that's proven, that would be part of a pattern that we've seen many times before by the Russians in the campaign in Syria, and indeed by the Israelis in the campaign in Gaza. If you break the ability of any organization to look after its population's health, you're very seriously undermining them. So that is definitely a campaign aim that the Russians have been able to pursue. The Iranians are saying that they will bid fulsome support for the Assad regime. They have encouraged up to 50,000 fighters to go in from Iraq. We're not quite sure whether or not they've actually crossed effectively into Syrian territory and whether or not they're really going to be committed to the fight. And similarly, the Iranians, they do have personnel that they could throw at this, but they have lost that 40,000 fighters that were part of the Lebanese Hezbollah that have now been occupied in their fight with Israel. Now, that is the opportunity that has presented itself, particularly in the west of the country, for this rebel advance.
And what are the prospects for Assad? He's got to fight back. Has he got the strength to do so?
Well, it was interesting, wasn't it? He was in Russia or had gone to Russia just as this renewed rebellion got underway. There might have been an anticipation that he might choose to stay in Moscow, but he came back if his movements can be confirmed. I mean, I think that indicates that he remains at this stage fairly confident. Remember, this was a rebellion that started in his own territories, in Aleppo, in Damascus, indeed, and with a combination of ferocity and atrocity and the help of Iran and Russia and Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Assad regime was able to fight them off. So it's not over for the Assad regime yet, not by any means.
Brilliant. Well, that's Sam Kiley, the veteran international correspondent, taking us through what is happening in Syria now that the rebels who took Aleppo last week have now taken the city of Hama.
صاروا ترند بعد الفيديو ايه شفته؟ هيك على الرجعة على الرباط